Joining us on line number 4 is the Vice President of the Lower Churchill Project, Gilbert Bennett. Good morning, Mr. Bennett. You're on the air.
Hi, good morning, Paddy. How are you today?
Fine today, sir. You?
Not too bad at all.
Good. What provokes the call today?
I guess just some of the comments you had earlier on. I thought I'd just call in and we'd have a chance to discuss some of those issues.
Okay, some of the ones that I made, you start, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. I mean, I think there's, look at a couple of questions. I mean, I think if I'd think about some of the work we're doing legally, for example, I think there's been some conversation about that over the past number of weeks, and I think it's important to put in context here the magnitude of work we're doing. Right, you have activities that are undertaken over a number of years. We're looking since 2012. We have billions and billions of dollars of contracts and financing in place. And, I think there are complex issues in those. And I think it follows that you need high caliber legal advice in working through each of those activities.
Yeah, I mean, I don't dispute that, and nor do I know what a reasonable or expected number for legal fees would be over the course of 3 years, but I know we've been in court a fair bit, and we've also had less than positive results on some of those court challenges and cases, so I don't know what the right number is. But when it comes to some of the specifics, for instance, the water management agreement, I know we're in the middle of that. When you were called to testify under oath, what was that about? What were the questions you were asked?
So, first of all, as you point out, that is a matter before the court, and it relates to a dispute between CFLCO and Hydro-Quebec, and I'm an officer of, I'm not an officer of CFLCO or an employee. I'm in the other Nalcor subsidiaries. So, we complied with the request that was made, and but in terms of getting into details in that action, I'm not the right spokesperson to be there.
Was it about the water management agreement?
It was in relation to their case, and as I said, with the matter before the court, and me not being a representative of CFLCO, that's not a conversation that I should be engaging in. I can't get a CFLCO spokesperson. If that's helpful on that one, we can arrange that.
I think it's helpful, and okay. And if you can't say any more, let me ask you this question about water management. Because without it, the investment really doesn't pay off, whether it be the amount of electricity generated, any of the long-term hopes for potential sale of any surplus power, our plans to decommission Holyrood. All of these things go by the wayside. The numbers I see thrown around are, without the water management agreement being held up in the courts to give us enough water to generate maximum electricity at Muskrat Falls, we'll only be able to generate possibly or potentially just enough to satisfy our commitment to Nova Scotia and O'Meara, some 167-ish megawatts. Is that not a fair characterization if things don't go our way?
So let's look at water management for a second. I mean, as we know, the water management arrangement is put in place pursuant to provincial legislation, went to the review at the Public Utilities Board, and water management agreement terms were established through a process in our province. Mm-hmm. And that happened a number of years ago. So, the question of water management relates to timing of water flowing to Muskrat Falls, not the overall amount of water. So the overall energy production at Muskrat Falls, is going to be what that production is based on the water that will have to come down the river. We described in that proceeding the importance of having control of the timing. The province, of course, has established legislation to deal with that. From our perspective, the water management framework is as established by the PUB.
So on that front, though, and fair enough, I mean, it's one thing to have the water available at certain points of the day and not at others. For us, in a peak demand situation, it's pretty useless for us to have ability for a maximum output of power and the amount of power consumption if it's at 3 o'clock in the morning versus 7 to 9 o'clock in the morning when we get ready and you go to work, you go to school and those types of things. Is that how it's affected negatively if water management doesn't go our way? Is that a legitimate understanding?
So, as I said, I can't get into the specifics of the case other than to say that the dispute is about the interpretation of the power contract. We have a water management framework pursuant to our laws in our province.
Okay.
Those are separate issues.
Fair enough. Let's move on to some of the issues that was dug up by Cochrane, Antle and others at the CBC, and it's our involvement, of course, with SNC-Lavalin. We were always told, there's nothing to see here, folks. There's nothing to worry about, despite the fact that they're a company held in international disgrace and disrepute given their corrupt behaviour in many parts of the world. And now stories like this Opron Construction. We say that we've gone through best practices, that we hired a company, and I don't know if you knew or not about Giuseppe Borsellino and who that guy is and some of his shady background. But how do we end up with all the companies available on the face of the earth? How do we end up doing business with the companies who have really tainted and if not forever stained reputations as being corrupt? SNC, Opron and others who we don't even know may indeed be working on the project?
So maybe I can start by saying that. So the topic that's being investigated at the Charbonneau Inquiry is a very serious issue. So the relationship between the construction industry, procurement in Quebec, I mean, those are important questions, and certainly we're looking forward to seeing what comes out of that inquiry and what the final report looks like. From our perspective, we look at a procurement process that's established to avoid that situation. So we have a process that sees different individuals looking at the various aspects of our evaluation. So commercial evaluation is separate from technical, separate from quality, and the other factors that we assess in the evaluation process. We look then beyond the team that does the evaluation to a separate group of people in the approval chain who ultimately approve that contract. And those processes are established in order to avoid the situation that we've seen in Quebec.
So, but all that being said, is that the long answer to saying that our vetting process has flawed and has resulted in the hiring and the allowing of these companies to participate in their own big project on the Churchill River?
So if we look at the process that we have for making sure that we have companies from a variety of, we want competition in that process. So first of all, you say, okay, let's make sure that we have qualified companies in that process, and we have an expression of interest that goes out and identifies qualified companies to compete for that work. We have established processes that are intended to avoid the situation we're seeing in our neighboring province, and ultimately are designed to get best value for the people of the province. So, ultimately, there are, a number of issues that are arising in Quebec we're not seeing here.
Well, that's because we haven't made it through that potential timeline here yet, though, either. It's not that it may not indeed be part of an eventual investigation or commission in this province, because we're still in the middle of the project. So in the vetting process, is it, and if this could be yes or no, that would be helpful, is it a failure in our vetting process to have a company like Opron involved in the project? And does best value also include avoiding companies like that with a track record of corruption and a track record of leaving in their wake subcontractors with their hand out waiting for money, like the $8 million that Opron owes to others? So that two-pronged question, is it not a failure of vetting, and doesn't best value include avoiding these companies?
So, first of all, if I looked at the commission has not made a determination. We look for decisions that are made, and there's due process that needs to be followed. That's the first observation I'd make. The second thing about claims between subcontractors and contractors, that is not an unusual process. That is something that subcontractors are aware of. They're in the construction business. We have legislation that addresses that. We have business practices that address those situations. So I draw a distinction between, what we're seeing in Quebec with the topic in the Charbonneau Inquiry, and how companies manage their commercial affairs between them and their other contractors.
But this guy actually admitted that he was involved in rigging bids for the Montreal Municipal Works project, and admits that he sent staff members there and their wives on holidays, which is not the normal process for any tender and or best practices or RFPs.
Oh, I fully agree that would not be a description of best practice. And, the safeguards that we have in our process are intended to avoid that kind of situation, that kind of influence.
How much that contract worth that Opron was involved with at the Lower Churchill?
Order of magnitude, $20 million. $10
or $20 million. When that question has been asked in the past, and we were told that we're not going to disclose those numbers, why is there a lapse in this stuff? Because there's nothing proprietary about banging up 9 buildings. There's no commercial sensitivity on those fronts. Should that not be a number that is, forget having to be asked for it, just publicly disclosed in whether it be the quarterly updates for a benefits agreement, making sure we're on top of the things benefits agreement? Shouldn't we just be having those numbers out there all the time to remove any of that cloak of secrecy or any of the mistrust that may be headed your way?
So 2 points. I think, first of all, if we look at oversight, there's an extensive oversight process established for the project, and we've talked about that many times, the role of our internal audit, our oversight by our external auditors, the role of the Auditor General, the Oversight Committee on the part of the province. So I think, first of all, in terms of oversight on an important project, those processes are there. I think the second consideration that we're always concerned about is making sure that we don't release commercially sensitive information at a time that actually undermines the interests of the people of the province. And that's an exceedingly important consideration when we're looking at the size of the magnitude of expenditures we're dealing with. I think Ed Martin has said previously that, at a point in time where we don't have a commercial sensitivity, then those numbers will come out.
When we go to bring a company in for a variety of things, and there's, of course, a long list of different expertise involved in companies required to complete this project. But when it's something as fundamental as putting up a building, and we have a variety of big contracting companies here in this province, how does some of this work end up in a Quebec company's lap? And I think that's one of the things people worry about, whether it be their priority list for hiring of Aboriginals, Labradorians, people on the island, in the country, and then down the list of priority. How do some of these contracts end up out of province in the first place? And is not best value also reflective of what's best value for for Newfoundland and Labrador-based companies, especially ones that can bang up a building?
So I agree that there are multiple companies who can construct buildings, but we ran an RFP process. We issued RFPs to 8 companies. 4 of those declined to submit a bid. And the decisions that are made by individual contractors, whether that be pricing, whether that be how they consider other work they may have on the go, how they put their proposal together. I mean, that's ultimately their decision to make. And what we're doing is establishing a process where they have the opportunity to participate.
Were there any Newfoundland and Labrador companies that replied to this RFP for the construction of those 9 buildings?
There were companies that were invited, yes.
Okay.
And I think the key there is, what we want to see is the best proposal. And if the Newfoundland and Labrador company does that, great. But I guess the question is, what do you do when they're not the best proposal?
Fair point. And, of course, when we didn't see any of their replies to the invitation, then it's impossible for me to make that determination. Can you be just a little bit more specific on the answer to the value of the Opron construction contract? 10 to 20 million is a pretty big variance there. Can you give us a little closer number about what the value is?
I think what I'm trying to get to is that's the order of magnitude of work we're talking about. We're not talking about powerhouse contract here, and I think it's important. I mean, no matter what the value of the contract is, I think what I'm trying to get to is that we have a rigorous process that sees multiple individuals involved looking at their areas of expertise. And then you combine the results of those evaluations. You present that to the team that ultimately approves the process, and that goes up the approval line. And ultimately, we enter into that contract.
Couple of other issues, and some of these things that are being discussed. Social media, of course, the hotbed for controversy at Muskrat Falls. And one of the issues that I've seen in the last couple of days is people talking about our relationship with Emera and how much power they receive for their commitment to construct the Maritime Link to the tune of $1.56 billion. People say free electricity, and it's hard to contradict that statement that they, for their investment, get absolutely free electricity. I know that Nalcor takes umbrage with that, but how can it be characterized as any other way? They provide the transmission link, but what they get in return is absolutely free blocks of electricity guaranteed, right?
They get 20% of the production of Muskrat Falls.
At no cost.
Well, they paid $1.56 billion for it.
Right.
That's a significant investment. And what we get in return is transmission rights on that transmission line. So we get 300 megawatts across to Nova Scotia. We get access to their transmission system to get to the U.S. market, both across Nova Scotia and through New Brunswick to get to New England, which is something that we find very valuable. Transmission access for an energy exporter is a very valuable asset.
But don't we pay a tariff when and if we sell power at the end? When it goes to one of the clearing markets, we pay a tariff anyway. So what's that transmission actually worth in dollars and cents if we have some number you can offer?
Well, the important aspect is we get access to it when we want it, and when we only pay for it when we use it, which is a distinction from what you see in other markets. And I would say that we've undertaken significant effort to get transmission access elsewhere. So, for us, transmission access is a valuable commodity. It's not just a question of paying for it. It's being able to get it when you need it. And that's an important aspect of this agreement.
One last issue inside the Maritime Link is the investment of $1.56 billion is, of course, a substantial amount of money. And the 20% they get in the block of what is at no charge, electricity and transmission rights and the ability to flow power, all understood. But part of the issue that people say is that we're going to inherit that Maritime Link after 35 years. And there's always been a dispute about the lifespan of that link in the first place. So what exactly is the value of that investment? I mean, transmission can't be nowhere near the value of $1.56 billion. And we're inheriting a link that some people, and this is worldwide experts, have also said we might only have 5 years, maybe 10 years left of actual viable lifespan left in that link. So how do we actually extrapolate value for what we're actually giving up?
So I haven't seen a cable expert indicate anything less than a 50-year useful life for that submarine system, the same as our own in the Strait of Belle Isle. There's been opinion passed around, but when we look at submarine cable expertise, the design life of that mass impregnated cable is 50 years. So we're not arguing there. In terms of having access to the asset, as I said, we look at a couple of other points maybe. We have access to the market when we need it. We have the federal loan guarantee because we've established a regional project. There's considerable value in having that loan guarantee and reducing our financing cost. And finally, we have access to the Nova Scotia market. So we have an opportunity to sell additional energy to them at market prices while avoiding tariffs going to New England. So I haven't even talked about the reliability benefit of having another connection to the North American grid beyond the Labrador Island Transmission Link, and none of those items have been costed, but they are significant value. So, part and parcel of this is that we have a broader project with better opportunities than we would have otherwise. And if we hadn't built the link and you had a surplus of energy at Muskrat Falls that's beyond what we need in the short term, we'd be relying on Quebec to get it out. And having access to the link and being able to get that energy into the market is a significant opportunity.
Do you think we've ever appropriately addressed the negotiations with Quebec prior to the sanctioning of Muskrat Falls? Because you just mentioned, without the Maritime Link, we rely on Hydro-Quebec for the transmission of power. Has anyone ever released any of the details there about what that would have cost, how the arrangement would have looked, how it would have been compared in a cost analysis of all the potential benefits with using Emera as a private sector partner as opposed to negotiations with Hydro-Quebec? We've always heard that there was negotiation, but is there a potential to release some documents that give us some understanding of what it would have looked like, how the negotiations went, how long they took place, and any benefit cost analysis that was done?
Well, Paddy, we didn't get there, right?
So they just shot you down. So that's how it works, is it? You asked them, they said no.
Well, I mean, so we looked at we have a couple of open access applications in Quebec. They weren't successful. They said no, we're not going to do those grid upgrades. We have litigation, multiple lawsuits going on, reference back to the legal fees we're dealing with. I'd have to question how one could conclude that we're going to sit down and negotiate a deal with Muskrat Falls under that scenario.
Right.
I mean, there's not a very favorable for us negotiating position to be in.
No, and I just wonder if anywhere in the future, because there's always going to be a question. And and I've had this conversation with many people, including yourself and Mr. Martin. I'm just wondering, because people will always say, if we treated Quebec like the boogeyman, we may have put ourselves behind the 8 ball financially to avoid doing business with them because they screwed us at the upper threshold. And that kind of conversation. No,
and I wouldn't characterize it that way. And if you look at the work done on the question of interconnecting the island with Labrador or isolated case, that was based on our own domestic requirements. So go back and look at Muskrat Falls and the link as being our least cost option. That was the basis that we started down that road, and that we looked at value creating opportunities with Emera. So I wouldn't characterize the situation as saying that there's a boogeyman out there that we're not prepared to deal with. That's far from the case. go back and look at the evaluations that were done. It was based on our own domestic need and then creating value for that surplus energy from Muskrat Falls.
Has any of this changed, whether it be, and I know long-term forecasts the price of a barrel of oil are going to be tricky when it comes to either selling the project and or reevaluating, but even like Wade Locke, when he said, had it $8 billion, it was time to take a step back and have another look, based on, what was lowest cost option and best value for the people of the province. Are we anywhere near stopping and having another look at this project? Is there any merit in that look, whether it be politically, but also in the business model? Because these are some of the numbers that the province's old economists, the people they go to, they floated those numbers. So is there ever a time, and are we nudging up against it, where we have to stop and reevaluate?
So, there's a couple of observations. First, it is a long-term asset. It's an asset that has useful life of decades and potentially centuries. So the value of that asset, if we go back and look at Bay d'Espoir, we probably would have had a similar conversation back then in the 60s. Looking at it today, we're in a very favorable place. We haven't begun to talk about environmental considerations, so imperative to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. That hasn't factored into our economics to date. That is a hot topic today, and we're going down a road to significantly reduce our emissions in the electricity sector. We'll be 98% renewable when the project is finished. It's an important environmental objective in of itself. In terms of looking at what to do, well, the financing is complete. Major contracts, the vast majority of major contracts are complete. I think I'd have to say, frankly, that the decision to sanction the project has been taken, and we're on this path. Our job now is to manage it effectively and deliver the project to the best of our abilities.
We appreciate your time this morning, Mr. Bennett. We're way overdue for our news break, but we do appreciate you making time for the show.
No problem.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Paddy.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Gilbert Bennett, Vice President of the Lower Touchel Project at Nalcor.